How exactly are you going to repay the debt of slavery, and who is going to repay the debt of slavery exactly?
This is exactly right. And Bernie Sanders said this last night on CNN. I mean, I'm sounding like a Bernie supporter here, but the fact is that Sanders is clearer on this than Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren. And when Kamala Harris is asked how, she immediately begins citing all sorts of kind of normal Democratic government programs that she'd like to see pushed anyway, which is not slavery reparations. That's just what we call the Democratic political agenda. The reality is that slavery reparations per se are completely unworkable. Even big advocates of it, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, have failed to come up with any actual metric for how exactly we'd go about doing that. What do you do with, for example, Barack Obama, whose father was black and not from the United States and therefore not having a history with slavery, and a mother who is white? Would his family receive slavery reparations? How about Kamala Harris, whose father is Jamaican and mother is Indian? Does she receive slavery reparations? From whom? Does she receive slavery reparations from me? My great-grandparents got here in 1907, long after slavery was over, and lived their entire lives in the North, where Jim Crow was not in effect. It's almost impossible. I think not almost. It is impossible to come up with a fair metric for recompensing slavery 10 generations after slavery's end. If you want to say that recompense should be had for people who benefited from Jim Crow, again, for people who were harmed by Jim Crow, I think that's an easier case. But again, it's going to be hard to determine who pays, who should get how much, and who receives.
Americans who are descendants of a chattel enslaved person or a free black person in America prior to 1900, instead of including all black Americans regardless of lineage. I got to kick it off with you. Your task force voted this week to limit compensation, as we just said, to the descendants of freed and enslaved black people who were in the U.S. in the 19th century. However, there are many people whose ancestors were enslaved and have lived here for nearly 200 years. Why exclude those folks, and how do you account for the harm that took place after enslavement, like redlining and Jim Crow, the war on drugs, violence, etc.? Your thoughts?
Thank you. So the California Reparations Task Force decided to define the community of eligibility in line with the intent of the author of the California Reparations Bill, Secretary of State Shirley Weber. And specifically, the task force decided to define the community of eligibility as those African Americans who are descendants of a chattel enslaved person or a free black person in America prior to 1900. And in January, Secretary Weber testified to the task force that lineage-based eligibility was her clear intent. Also, the language in the California Reparations Bill also overwhelmingly supports our decision for lineage-based eligibility. In addition, race-based or all black people policies are illegal and unconstitutional in California under Prop 209 and the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But lastly, from a common sense perspective, I think reparations for United States slavery and its legacies, Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow, should be for the descendants of U.S. slavery and its legacy, Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow.
Just a few months away from the deadline to submit reparation proposals,
you have 2 minutes.
This morning began with public comment.
There's been a system that has gotten us to where we are, and so it's going to take a systematic approach to help us come out of this.
Last year, California's Reparations Task Force identified 12 areas of systemic discrimination that still impact descendants of American slaves in the state. But they're focusing on potential compensation for 5 areas.
We've also been working with a team of economists and public policy experts to help us to identify what could potential compensation be for 5 state-sanctioned atrocities, 5 areas where there is data to support the state being culpable for.
This includes unjust property seizures, health harms, devaluation of businesses, housing discrimination, over-policing, and mass incarceration.
Things need to be done that can help to reverse some of the interior damage that has been done through slavery.
The reparations could be made available in cash, grants, tuition assistance, or financial programs. Gloria Puro-Dyer, who provided public comment, says it's time that the housing gap is addressed.
I'm interested in seeing reparations of some sort that can help the town of Allensworth and then also help the people who have been affected by this over a period of generations.
The 9-member task force is still working to determine how many Californians would benefit. including those who moved out of state after the task force was established and considering excluding anyone who moved into the state after September 30th, 2020. And the final proposals will be determined during the next few months, and it will be included in the final report, which is going to be released no later than July 1st. In Sacramento, Marisela de la Cruz, KCRA 3 News.
The final hearing will be in Allensworth in June. Allensworth is down in Tulare County. It was actually the first town in California established and run exclusively by African Americans, and that history dates all the way back to 1908.